I drive trucks for a living here in England. It was one of the only jobs I could pretty much just walk into after being medically discharged from the Army, the Royal Logistics Corps to be specific, with some pretty intense back problems. I tried physiotherapy, yoga, acupuncture, all sorts of things, but sitting in the cab of a military truck for such long periods had really done a number on my spine. It was horrible that I was basically forced into the same line of work, only in the civilian world, and I had no choice but to take a daily regime of pretty strong pain medication just to make it through the days and nights of long-distance truck driving. But that's neither here nor there, I suppose. I'd only been working for the company I'm at presently for about 6 or 7 months when I was driving down this lonely stretch of road just outside of Rotherham in South Yorkshire. There, I see this young woman at the side of the road, bags in hand, with her thumb out like she was looking to hitchhike. It's not like I don't see a good few hitchhikers on my routes. They're much more common than you might expect, especially during the summer months when people can afford to be standing at the side of the road, sometimes for hours at a time, waiting for lifts. I never normally stop for them. I've seen enough horror movies to know that you're inviting trouble on yourself if you just let total stranger into your truck for long distances. But there was something about this girl that actually had me slowing down and stopping at the roadside for her. I don't know if it was how young she was or how desperate she looked, and she definitely didn't look like the kind of scruffy hippie types or dodgy cardboard sign holders that I normally see standing out there. So, there I was, actually opening up my cab door and helping her climb inside. I asked where she was looking to go, only to have her reply something like anywhere, just drive. This bothered me a little bit, I'll be honest, as I didn't really like the idea of having someone just sat in the passenger seat for the foreseeable future. I'm not exactly the most sociable person, and awkward silences are annoying for me at the best of times, let alone when it's some girl that's half my age. God knows what people would think if they saw that I was stopping for random girls, probably that I was some sort of perv or whatever. So I ask her again, only rephrasing the question so that I make it clear that I can't just have her sitting in my truck for the foreseeable future, as I'd be looking for somewhere to stay overnight at some point. I know it sounds a bit mean, but I didn't want to have to properly look after this girl, paying for her food, paying for a hotel room and all that. I'd never picked up a hitchhiker before, but they're usually set on a certain place that you can just drop them off at, right? So after a bit of an awkward silence, and I've made clear that I loathe those, I asked her why she was on the roads. I'm basically explaining that I'm not a perv when I see a police car pass us on the road. Nothing unusual, so it barely registers other than for me to make sure I'm not over the speed limit or anything, you know, the usual I just saw a police car anxieties. But a moment later, I hear sirens behind me, looking into the rear view to see what appeared to be the very same car, having turned around to follow me, with a view to pulling me over. I groan, saying something about hoping my brake lights aren't out, something along those lines, and slowly begin to pull my truck over to the side of the road. This is right when the girl in the passenger seat freaks out and starts pleading with me not to pull over. I mean, not just pleading, she's begging, obviously getting really panicked at the idea of the police seeing her. Now this made me feel really bloody nervous. What had she done that made her nervous around the police, and how would that reflect on me if I was caught with her in the cab of my truck? These questions are whirling around my head as I tell her to calm down, and that I had absolutely no other choice than to pull over, that I was hardly about to get into a high-speed police pursuit on account of a complete stranger. She bursts into the tears at that point, just sinking her head into her hands and weeping. But she doesn't try to run away, nothing like that, so that sort of reassured me that she hadn't committed some sort of violent crime, or at least that she wasn't some hardened criminal on the run from the law. I watched the policeman that had pulled me over get out of his car and walk up to the side of my truck, which also happens to be the side that the girl is sat on. As soon as he looks through the window, I hear him say something like, "Get out of the truck, Natalie." This obviously has me taken aback. Who the hell was that girl that the police were on first name terms with her? The policeman motions for me to wind down my window, and I actually hesitate for a moment. The girl is obviously terrified of being arrested or whatever was about to happen. The policeman then says something over his radio, something I didn't catch because of the glass in the way, so in order to better hear what he's saying, I start winding the window down. It was too late to hear what he said on the radio, but I did hear what he said next. I suppose I knew all I needed to from what he just said then, but I looked on in a kind of grim fascination at what unfolded next. They're not my parents. Why won't any of you understand that? The girl started to scream. Every time you drag me back there, they do worse and worse things to me and call it punishment. They say it's for my own good, but it's not. It's not at all. She then turns to me, pulling up her sleeve and showing me all kinds of burns and scars up her arm, ones that were so pronounced and gross that I recoiled in disgust and horror. Please, I'm begging you, don't let them take me back. I'll do anything. Just please don't let them take me again. What was I supposed to do? Drive off with this girl and get chased by the police? She could have been mentally ill or something, severely delusional with a self-harm problem, and I'm just going to drive her off into the middle of nowhere so she can run away from her care home or something. Besides, I was terrified, absolutely terrified. Police backup arrived, and when there was enough of them, they dragged the girl out of my truck, kicking and screaming, before they threw her in the back of a police car and drove away. I tried to ask one of the police what the hell had just happened, and I expected to get an answer along the lines of one of my previous suspicions. But they actually just waved me away, told me it was none of my businesses and that I shouldn't have been picking up young women from the side of the road anyway. I still don't know what happened to that girl, and I hope she's gotten the treatment she needs. I've been a long-haul truck driver for a good few years now. I find it pretty enjoyable, to be honest. It just suits my lifestyle. I've never been the most sociable person, so I actually really like the whole thing of it just being me, with nothing but my stereo system and the open road for company. My job has taken me to some incredible places too, things that regular 9-to-5 office workers just never get to see from their dusty, dimly lit office spaces. Even those with views from skyscrapers and stuff, they never see the landscape change, how the sun frames mountain ranges, or how the moon shimmers off boundless lakes. Even with all the built-up areas, this country really is beautiful in parts. Wyoming and Montana are some of my favorites, the mountain ranges and prairies being like picture postcards in places. But, and I mean no offense here, but the Iowa cornfields get so tedious in places because there's literally nothing but cornfields as far as the eye can see. However, my least favorite place to drive in the entire country had to be Louisiana. Again, I mean absolutely no offense to any native sons of the Bayou State. I've had some of the best fried catfish I've ever tasted in little roadside diners while rolling through that place. But there's something inherently creepy about Louisiana too. Maybe it's just the humidity, the gators, or the way the Cajuns can just switch from English to French on a dime and shut you right out of a conversation. The whole Southern hospitality is as real as I'm surely breathing, and I really have met some of the nicest, most generous people in the entire country down in Louisiana. I'm talking the kind of people that would give you their last dollar or the shirt off their backs. But I guess it's just a place of extremes, because I also met some of the least welcoming and, quite frankly, most terrifying people I've ever met in my whole life down there. And this here is the story of one of those encounters, one that still keeps me up at night sometimes, and that takes a few glasses of vodka just to shut the memories out. So this one time, I'm rolling along this highway late in the evening, way behind schedule on a shipment due in Dallas, Texas. The tight timing meant it looked like I was going to have to pull another brutal all-nighter to get my load to the depot on time. But if that was going to be the case, I'd have to stop at some roadside crawfish shack to fill up on greasy food and coffee, so I had the energy to keep going. So I turned my truck off the road at the first place I saw, this place with a glowing luminous sign that flashed with half the letters missing, but it was all I needed to see. Rustin Crawfish Shack the place was called, and it was little more than a collection of sheet metal shacks at the side of the road. But hell, those are the kind of places where some Cajun mama bear has been making the same delicious po' boys for the last 30 years, and God, I just love what those people can do with a few shrimp and a slice of lemon. So I order up my food, get it to order, and then sit outside to wolf it down before I get back on the road, when some older black guy comes up to ask me where I'm from. He was pretty friendly, and I don't mean to be judgmental here, but he had a very, very unusual appearance. He dressed normally, had closed cropped hair, but he was very, very skinny, like unnaturally skinny, like he was just skin and bones with no muscle keeping his body upright whatsoever. I tell him up north originally, but that I'm based in Arkansas for my job, and we start just casually talking about the area and its history. He was a nice enough guy, but I had to excuse myself, telling him if I didn't get this load to the Dallas depot on time, that I'd be in a whole world trouble. It's the kind of thing that guys lose their jobs over, so I could not afford to play fast and loose with my timing. And in my case, the risk was extra high, since I had a high-value load of electronics, new TVs and such, and every day a delivery is late, the depot can fine a trucking company and dramatically lower their bottom line. He puzzles the thought over for a moment, then told me he thought he could help me out, and to wait there for a moment while he fetched something from a back room of the shack. At first I thought it was going to be some pills that would keep me extra wired all night, but what he brought out of that crawfish shack was something that sends chills through me, even thinking about it today. The guy returned with a piece of cypress wood in his hand, like a bare piece, looking like it had been freshly cut from a tree. He had me follow him over to my truck, out of sight of the rest of the crowd that was gathering outside of the shack. Once we were alone, he pulls out this huge knife and tells me to carve my name into the wood, my full name, or it won't work. I was just about to ask him what it was, when he shushes me, hands me the knife, then tells me to obey. The blade looks jagged and slightly bent, like it's been home forged or something. That was creepy enough on its own, but it was only when I take the knife from his hand do I see what the handle is made of. Y'all ever heard of a jawbone knife? It's literally what it sounds like. The blade is obviously metal, but the handle is made of an animal's jawbone. Some places it can be made of a bear or cougar's jaw, with the teeth kind of blunted so they don't rip your fingers up. Sounds weird, but they actually make for a great grip, and they were actually really popular back in the old frontier days. But this jawbone knife that he passed me was different. There was something horribly familiar about the shape and size of the teeth, the way only one of them was pointed, while the others were flat or jaggedly cupped. I thought it might have been a pig's jaw at first, but the actual jawline was way too thin for that. And it was with terror in my heart that I finally realized what I was looking at. It was human. That jaw had once belonged to a human being. I thought to say something, to ask him where the hell he's gotten his hands on such thing. I mean, I wanted to shove him away and throw his wooden board right back at him. But I'm telling you, when a guy has handed you a knife that you strongly suspect is made from a goddamn human jawbone, you ain't nothing but polite to him. So, I did as I was asked. I carved my name into the wood, then handed him back the knife, all while he seemed to take an immense amount of pleasure in knowing how afraid I was. He then tells me that he's going to bury the piece of wood out in the bayou somewhere, and that once he'd done that, I'd get to Dallas with my load on time, and that I wouldn't have to worry about a thing. So, long story short, I did get to Dallas on time. I was wide awake for the entire journey, made every exit and turn just like I was supposed to. But I was only so focused on the journey ahead because I wanted to keep the thoughts of where that knife had come from out of my mind. So, I suppose, in a manner of speaking, the little ritual did work. Maybe not in the way he had intended it to, where some weird bayou spirits had taken care of me for the remainder of my journey, but it was the thing that spurred me on to get the hell away from that crawfish shack and to my destination on time. The scariest thing to ever happen to me on a road or highway happened way back when I was a kid. My mom and dad had arranged a little weekend getaway for themselves, so they took us over to my aunt's place so we could hang out with our cousins and whatnot while they got themselves some well-deserved peace and quiet. We spent the first day just playing in a local park, throwing a football around, doing the things that kids do. But the next day, my aunt and another aunt of mine decided to drive us somewhere for some activity I can't even remember now. I mean, this happened so long ago that I can't even remember where we were driving or why. But I do remember being in the back seat, bored out of my skull, and just watching the road ahead of us through the gap in the seats. What I find kind of weird is how some details of this incident are burned into my memory while others completely escape me. I suppose that's just how memory works sometimes, so excuse me if this account seems spotty, but I think you'll all get the gist of it. On the road ahead of us was a brick red pickup truck, its rear storage space crammed with building equipment. I distinctly remember a bunch of bricks and building sand, and balanced on top, secured by some rope or some other kind of cordage, was a large, rusted wheelbarrow. A sheet of blue plastic tarp was flapping violently in the wind, and as the truck drove on ahead of us, I remember seeing the whole load rumbling and shaking in a way that, in retrospect, should have made me feel distinctly uncomfortable. I remember my aunts commenting on it, how they were pretty damn worried about how poorly the pickup's load was secured. But I didn't really think anything of it. When you're as young as I was, you just don't consider certain possibilities or dangers. So I had no idea what was about to happen, and when it did, the whole thing scared the hell out of me in a way that I don't think I've ever felt since. I watched in absolute horror as the wheelbarrow came loose and fell off the back of the pickup. It didn't happen in stages, it didn't slip and then fall, giving the aunt who was driving time to swerve or back off or whatever. It just fell, suddenly and violently, right off the back of the pickup and into the road as the car I was in continued to speed towards it. My aunt screamed, one throwing her hands up to her face, as she obviously expected the thing to slam into the windshield of the car. We were on the highway at the time, driving at maybe 60 or 70 miles an hour, and at those speeds, there's no telling what kind of catastrophic damage it would have caused. But somehow, the wheelbarrow hit the road and actually bounced. It bounced in a way I never thought possible for something made almost entirely of metal. Maybe it landed on its rubber wheel first, and that's what gave it a little extra momentum, but somehow it narrowly missed the windshield and scraped against the roof of our car. An orchestra of beeping car horns erupted behind us as we slowed to a stop, but my aunts knew they weren't directed at them for slowing to a stop. I remember a guy from the car behind getting out to see if we were okay, and thank God we were. Meanwhile, the pickup in front of us just kept going, probably knowing full well that they'd be subject to arrest or something for not securing their load properly. So yeah, that's definitely the scariest thing I've ever had happen to me on a car journey, by a long shot.